Okay, we're going to move on to what I call the colorful 1960s, and we're going to talk about lots of different things. But the first thing we're going to start with is the 7 contributing factors to violence in the 1960s. The 1960s was a very violent decade compared to decades in the past, and really kind of stands out even today. I'll tell you one thing real quick, like. We'll talk about homicides in the 1960s, and we're going to give you percentages. Of the people that were murdered in the 1960s, you had a 33 1/3% chance of that person being someone related to you. You had a 33.3% chance that if you got murdered, it was somebody that you knew. So you had a 67% chance, approximately, of being murdered by somebody you either knew or were related to, and only a 33% chance of being murdered by somebody you didn't know. That's how violent the decade was when they did the statistics on it. Gun homicide rate, what's that mean, gun homicide rate?
Murders with handguns.
Murders with handguns. 40 times. In the 1960s, the gun homicide rate in the United States was 40 times that of any other country in the world. We had 40 times more people murdered by handguns. So it was a violent decade. So I'm going to give you 7 contributing factors to violence in the 1960s. And you've heard of these and they'll make sense. The first one is the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a contributing factor to violence in the 60s. Why?
People didn't like black people.
Yeah, violence, how black people were treated, people were beaten, even white people were beaten. The civil rights movement was beaten to death. And all of this is on TV. We've got all kinds of riots at different places. And where is this all coming on TV night after night after night? So the civil rights movement itself was a contributing factor to violence in the 60s because of the violence and coverage of violent civil rights protests and riots all the way across the United States. Okay, what would be the obvious second thing that contributed to violence in the 60s? The Vietnam War. Okay, the Vietnam War. And why? Again, television's a big part of this because we had nightly news coverage of the Vietnam War. They even had body counts on the news. Okay, how many were killed today and how many total? Then you go to Tuesday. How many were killed today? How many total? We had nightly body counts reported back to the United States daily, which were then put on the news every night when they were reporting about the Vietnam War. Now, not only did we have violence in reporting about the war, what else was violent that occurred with the war that we had on TV every night? But riots and protests. So the Vietnam War was a contributing factor to violence in the 1960s, without doubt. You know what else did? Movies. The third is movies. What was the difference between movies in the 60s and movies in the 50s? Movie theaters became much more violent, just like we talked about the change in nudity and stuff. It also became more violent, which also resulted in those new ratings, like Shana said. So it wasn't only for, the nudity in movies. Movies became much more violent, big time. Okay, and you saw blood and guts on the screen for the first time. Now, again, it's kind of tough when talking to you guys about it because when you watch a movie now, my wife, my God, first time there's blood shooting out of somebody, we got to turn the movie off. So she would have never made it. Okay, the fourth contributing factor. No, we got civil rights, Vietnam War, movies. Okay, fourth were musical groups. Musical groups. Many musical groups began to concentrate on violence in their lyrics. Now again, that's hard for you to understand because I think you have all kinds of different lyrics nowadays that just absolutely would tip everybody over in the 1960s. But the music contained drug-laden and violent lyrics, and young kids are listening to that. They're being influenced by that, just like you're being influenced by music. And that was also a contributing factor to violence in the 60s, music and music groups. Another one that might surprise you, number 5, and I've got examples in here, toys. The consumer culture in toys. Toys actually became more violent. What was the big thing that they were building in those days? Army men, okay, and Tommy guns and all that. Now I have different G.I. Joes up there because the G.I. Joe has never died. If you look at the one in the small box right there, see the smallest box that's open? That is a copy of an original 1964 G.I. Joe in the box. If I have one at home in the box, it's worth close to $1,000 because it's in mint condition in the box. Nobody kept the boxes, right? They threw the boxes away when the kids did. So if you have a mint G.I. Joe from '64 in the box, It's worth a lot of money. That's a replica that came out. But anyway, those were the big deal. Tommy guns, those Tommy guns, and people were promoting them. As a matter of fact, in latter stages of the Vietnam War, because of protests, they changed G.I. Joe from G.I. Joe Army Man to G.I. Joe Adventure Hero. And I have one of those in my office, and they put a kind of a afro on him and a beard, and it was fuzzy, you could feel it. And they changed the whole philosophy, and the military uniforms went away, and they brought in the action hero instead, because people were protesting on the war. So if you get on eBay and look up vintage G.I. Joes from the 60s, you would be shocked what they're worth. Okay, so we had G.I. Joes, machine guns, army men, that was a big deal. So toys contributed also to violence in the 1960s. One that should be very evident to you, number 6, was political assassinations. You think about that, in a period, really, if you think about it, in a period of 5 years, from 1963 through 68, just in 5 years, you had 3 major assassinations. The President of the United States, his brother, who was a senator running for the presidency, and Martin Luther King Jr., not to mention the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald, all that was done on television. So you had really 4 assassinations in 5 years. The President of the United States, his assassin, Martin Luther King Jr., the lead person in the Civil Rights Movement, and Bobby Kennedy running for president, President Kennedy's brother. All that on TV every single night. So political assassinations also led to violence. And the 7th and probably most visible influence was the drug culture. The drug culture, which actually is our next subtopic. The drug culture in the United States. A lot of IDs under this. So what I'm going to do under the drug culture is I'm going to give you 5 serious factors that led to the drug culture across the United States. 5 things that led to the drug culture. And the first one is motorcycle gangs. So 5 things that led to the drug culture in the 1960s, which is the 7th contributing factor to violence in the 60s, motorcycle gangs. Who's the most famous motorcycle gang you know?
Hells Angels.
The Hells Angels. Now I'll give you a little history on the Hells Angels. I'll tell you a story, then we're going to quit for today. After World War II, Michael, what became very available to people back in the United States? Motorcycles. And so motorcycle, now listen to me, motorcycle groups, not gangs, spread out all over the country. So Terran Pennington might get all his buddies together, and that might be the Pennington 7. And they're a motorcycle group. And Burke might get his friends together, or Shelby might get her friends together. And they had a lot of different motorcycle groups, which you do today. A lot of Harley-Davidson owners get together with groups and ride. Okay? Well, some of those groups became jerks and became a problem. And so motorcycle groups were getting a bad reputation. So the good motorcycle group stood up one day and said, well, don't let 1% of all of these groups make it bad for everybody. Well, those 1% that were a problem grasped onto that, and what did they call themselves, Michael? 1%ers. And it led to badass motorcycle groups, the most famous one being the Hells Angels, who were originally known as the, I'd really be impressed if you did this. What was the Hells Angels' original name?
I don't.
The Pissed Off Bastards. That's the truth. The Pissed Off Bastards. Then a guy by the name of Sonny Barger. You ever heard of him, Michael? Sonny Barger took over the Pissed Off Bastards and transformed them into what we know now as the Hells Angels. And they have chapters all across this country and in Europe. Unbelievable. So here's the story. Put away your notes. No, this is a good story. I'm going to turn off the video.